All right, welcome everybody to another DoneJS survey. We have got some exciting new features that we want to work on, and we are going to talk about them, and then hopefully you will vote on the ones that you like the most, and then we will start out building them. I think Chasen will have a summary out of the ones that we have done. We've been working really hard on CanJS 4.0. A lot of the things that people request for CanJS 4.0 are now done. The only really lingering one is the can set and can connect improvements. That's going to happen starting the second we release CanJS 4.0. And then the door is open for mostly a new round of issues that we will be starting. So make sure that you are voting on this survey. With that being said, I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to talk about each feature, starting with the Steel 2.0 release that Matthew's going to talk about.
All right. Hey, actually, I think I'm going to do the tree shaking one first, just because I think
I'm in tree shaking.
Yes. Did you know? Okay. Let me share my screen. Tree shaking, you might have heard of this before. It's kind of a industry term that's been out there for a little while. Julian, our DoneJS contributor, came up with this idea. He explained a little bit about what you do with tree shaking. This is a great example. So you have a library called HiDash here. It exports two functions, an intersection and a flatten function. But you're actually only using the flatten function. So this code is, there's another term for this is dead code. This is code that's never actually going to be used. So the idea of tree shaking is that we can kind of look at all of our imports and all of our exports, and we can figure out which ones are not used, and then we can just remove this code. And then, as you know, the term tree shaking kind of as the term means, I guess, is that you shake these things out, is that you remove stuff, and then that causes other stuff to also not be used. So it's just kind of like a recursive algorithm to shake as much stuff away as you can until there's not much left. So that's what tree shaking is. I back in end of November, very end of November, I did kind of a 2-day spike just to try to figure out how this works in other tools that support this and how we could make it work in Steel, and just how the algorithm itself works, because it's kind of a little bit complicated. It's a lot of like AST transformation stuff that that we started doing a little bit in Transpile, but I don't have a ton of experience with myself. So there's an RFC out. Steel has an RFC repo. There is a pull request about adding this. I don't think anyone oh, I didn't see Frank's comment. I'll have to read that. I don't think anyone opposed tree shaking, so I'll probably put this. We have an RFC process. I'll probably put this into the final comment. That just gets it merged in so that we can say, yeah, this is something we're interested in working on. It doesn't mean we're going to work on it right away. But if you would like for us to work on this soon, please vote on this issue and kind of express your interest in this being something that comes sooner rather than later. So that is tree shaking. Should I just go right on to the next?
Yeah, good job. You did it in just under 3 minutes.
Nice, perfect. Cool. This one will be way shorter because there's not much to say. So yeah, you can think about, tree shaking is a very nice feature to add to Steel. Another option that we could do, something that would be much simpler, because tree shaking is kind of it's a complex feature to implement. We could do a pretty quick Steel 2.0. This would take us not very long at all. It might take us like a week or two. And just to do some kind of a small, just a few small things that would help with debuggability, which is removing the promise polyfill. Currently, Steel.js comes with a promise polyfill. I don't know like how much code would be removed by not having that in the Steel.js file, but it would probably reduce the size by a few kilobytes. So that would be good, but it's also great for debuggability, because if you use the debug tools like in Chrome or Firefox, when you have a promise, when you have native promises, you can kind of easily see stuff happening within the stack trace. Whereas when you use a polyfill, you get all of the extra polyfill code that's happening. So it just makes it much easier to debug stuff. We would still have the promises available. We would have a separate file called Steal with Promises or something like that. I don't know what it would be called. That you could use that, just for to get your IE11 support. So that's kind of the biggest thing, and it's like to me it's such a simple, nice win that like why wait on that at all? The other thing, we'd probably remove the Bower plugin. No one uses that. We'd remove support for npm2, which almost no one uses, which just means kind of cutting down some of the Steal plugin code a little bit. We've been talked about making it not having the main, or excuse me, making the main attribute in the Steal script tag required. It makes it easier to use Steal, because if you always have to put in the main, then it makes it so that on demo pages and stuff, you don't have to put @empty as your main, which is kind of a weird thing to have to do. So that'd be the only like breaking change, I think. Well, excuse me, all these are actually breaking as well. There might be some more stuff. This isn't a definitive list. Then lastly, I wanted to kind of like clean up the logging output a little bit for Steal. Maybe add some color to it. Maybe condense it down. Currently, like if you have a large bundle, it lists every single module for the bundle. So I'd like to have like kind of a verbose and a less verbose different setting for that kind of thing. So those are the kind of major things. So this would be pretty small. I think this would be, like I said, a week or two of time. We are working on DoneJS 2.0 right now. So if this was like voted on, then we might actually do this first and get it into 2.0. Oh, my dog. Stop. Sorry about that. Yeah, we might be able to get this into DoneJS 2.0. Like I said, if people really want it, then we could do that pretty quickly. And that's it for Steal 2.0. I think my dog likes the idea.
That one actually took longer than the tree shaking.
I can't believe it. Okay. Lastly is built-in support for Babel preset env. So what Babel preset env is, I can't hardly say that. A way to configure Babel so that it only transpiles features that you need to have transpiled. So in other words, if you're only supporting evergreen browsers, well, then you don't need it to transpile the class syntax, because that's supported by all the native browsers and that kind of thing. So what Babel preset env does is it kind of on the fly determines what features your browser is capable of and doesn't transpile. So it's great for development mode. However, to do this, it depends on dynamic requires, which Steal doesn't support dynamic requires. But because we include Babel already, it's already bundled with Steal, we could actually kind of make this work, kind of hack it in to some degree. So yeah, it's a useful feature. A lot of people have shown interest in this. If you're someone that's interested, please vote on this. And that's it for Steal.
Awesome, thanks. Kevin, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. I will share my screen. All right. First proposal I'm going to talk about is this testing guide for CanJS. So basically, this is an overall guide for testing CanJS applications. There's a lot of kind of dark arts that you need to know in order to test applications and to make your code easy to test. So this would kind of cover all of that. So there's a few things laid out in here. View models, this is what you're most often testing in your applications. And we have kind of the basics of how to do that in a few different of our guides. This will explain those things, but also explain more complex topics like how to create asynchronous tests and when you need to do that and that kind of stuff. Also testing components. We normally don't really show how to test components, and right now it's not super easy. So this will first cover this issue that is to make it easier to test components, and then we'll also kind of explain how to do that, when to test using the DOM, how to test without using the DOM, all that kind of stuff. Routing is another thing that we don't really have a lot of information or guidance on how to test your routing setup. So we'll talk about that. We'll show how to use can route param and dparam to create tests so that you're not actually changing your actual browser's URL. Models is another thing. We've got some documentation on how to use CanFixture to set up some generated data and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll also, later on, we'll add on how to test set algebras and can connect and all that kind of stuff after the can query changes are in. And then the last thing I mentioned here is functional testing. So we'll go over a little bit how to create functional tests, how to test your actual UI, simulate a real user clicking through your application for things like smoke tests and larger functional test suites. All right, that is the testing guide proposal. Justin, you want to?
Minute and a half. Well done, Kevin.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about, which I think is I'm gonna say, because of all the negative feedback about this issue, is actually the best issue of this go around. Haters gonna hate, but I'm gonna press through because I think this is at least a very nice to have feature, although maybe not as critical as some of the others. And what this is it's basically just ripping off Vue's ability to have event modifiers for some common stuff that people want to do. And I think there's kind of two reasons for it. One is, the first one is, so if you've ever written the code like this where you have a form and you want to listen to what someone calls submit and call some send data that's going to send the form data to do an AJAX request of the form data, something like that. You've got to call prevent default. And this makes send data a little bit trickier to test because essentially we're violating the kind of view model separation. Our DOM is infecting our view model. And I do this all the time, and I will agree with people. It's not like that bad. It's just annoying. So this proposal is, at its highest level, I would say vote for this if you want to solve problems like this annoying problem. And I also say there's some subtler problems with things like if you wanted to listen on the capture phase of submit, or you only wanted when this form was submitted because maybe you had nested forms or something like that, and the submit event bubbles. If you want to do stuff like that, you can't really even do it inside the view model and in the view. You'd have to go to like a components event object, and even components event object can't do the capture phase. There's no real good way of saying I want to do the capture phase. You would have to do right now like a connected callback or inserted event, and then do that binding yourself and make sure it's torn down. It's a little bit onerous. I think Vue makes this really nice. So I talked about different ways that we could possibly implement it. I don't actually want to get into details of that because I want the details of how we solve it, to me, are less important than solving it. I guess the final argument I'll make is that it's, I forgot what this is, not an argument from authority, but from like popularity. Vue has a whole bunch of these, like enter, delete, but like, to me, the ones that are really important are the ones that you cannot do like capture, or they're just, or self, which this only when the event has been bound on itself does it actually call the method. If you want to see this problem solved in like some way, vote for this. The only other, I guess I will talk about the one other suggestion is, this is one suggestion that I propose is like supporting multiple
statements,
but this doesn't actually fix the listening on the capture phase or doing things like that. That doesn't fix it. I've thought about it before, and I'm sorry because I wrote this issue last night very quickly. But what I've wanted to do, that's actually the time from Kevin's plus mine. So I've got another second here. What I really would love to be able to do if it was a real like dream would be to just do something like on drag, and you can actually like pass kind of like additional arguments somehow to the event. But I don't know if syntactically we can make something like this possible. That's why I think what Vue did, at least, is a happy medium. But again, vote for this if you want to solve this problem and give something that makes it easy and there's a pattern that doesn't infect your Vue model. That's what I care about the most.
I kind of like the multiple statement ideas, just so that we get to debate whether there should be automatic semicolon insertion or not. That would be fun.
Oh my gosh.
All right, I changed my vote. I don't want that one anymore.
All right, Kevin, back to you.
All right. All right, this next one is maybe the one I'm most excited about. Maybe that's just because it's the one that took me the longest to write. Anyway, this proposal is to create really awesome dev tools for CanJS. I'm calling this Can Coach, the CanJS Observable and Change Helper, although I came up with the name and then I figured out what the letter should stand for, so I don't know how useful that is. A lot of this proposal is really going to be shown here in these super ugly but hopefully inspiring GIFs. So this first one, something that we could do with DevTools is make it really easy. Oh, that's smaller. Make it really easy to change values in your view model. So you see here, this gives you the ability to select a component and then change some values in your view model. We can figure out what the types of your properties are. So like this one that's a checkbox, we know that that's a Boolean value and things like that. Being able to do this it really speeds up development and makes testing things quickly really easy. The next thing that we want to show is bindings in your application. So make it really easy to see how the values in your app flow through your component tree. So anyone who's had to pass data, like pass a value through a large component tree has had this problem where they, if you miss one for some reason, things in the inner part of your app aren't updating and things like that. So Manuel did a lot of work for CanJS 4.0 so that we can track these dependencies. We also did this cool graphing visualization. So we can build on that to really expose these bindings and expose how your data is passed throughout your app really easily. We probably would visualize this a little different because this graph is cool looking, but it's really not super easy to tell what's going on. But we would, in some way, make it easy for you to see the bindings in your app. The next part of this is the queues. So CanJS 4.0 added can queues in order to make how values change in your app more deterministic, but this also can make it kind of hard sometimes to debug because all this stuff gets passed through queues and they run at different times and things like that. So we really want to expose this information. So this first image here is showing, like, if you're stopped at a breakpoint, you can see, if you're stopped at a breakpoint in your code, you can see what actually happened in the application that caused that code to run. So we can see each of the tasks that's in the CanQ stack that caused the change that you're looking at now to happen. One other thing that we could potentially do is something like a slow mode, that is what Justin called it, or I've got it here called break on flush, where we really, let's start this over. If you make a change in your application, we basically pause as each step of the queues, each task in the queue is moved from one stage to another. So you can kind of see here, we're pressing this play button here at the bottom, and we can see how the changes are progressing through the different queues. Cool. So some other things that we could potentially do is in each of these images, there's this little bug icon. We could potentially show errors and warnings to people, and this would give us a place to give a little bit more detailed information or provide links or suggest code changes. We could also, a thing that I thought about is allowing users to really quickly submit issues through the DevTools. That's something we talked about. Sometimes when there are errors, it's nice to be able to submit an issue with a screenshot really quickly. So yeah, DevTools. If you're into DevTools and you think this stuff would be useful, definitely vote for this proposal.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, gonna reset and go. So then my next one is create a stash animation guide and the functionality necessary to support it. Animations are workable in Stash, but I would say there's a few holes that I want to fill out, and I'll go through those as I'm talking about what would be part of the guide. So the guide would show how to create a robust animation helper that I guess I'll show eventually how you would call it in your template, that you could call like on click, I want to fade in this div. And I could pass it arguments. And I would want this to run the animation with the element. Now, if you know Stash, and this is just a technical aside, you know this isn't passing the element. So these functions like fade in need to be specially labeled so that we know to pass them the element and the event that happens so that they can do more or less fun things. So for the most part, you would just get the element as this.element, fade in for whatever people passed, and we would encourage people to use continuation style passing so that when this animation faded in, there's another function that someone might have passed and you call that back. This pause and resume, I will talk about that, but if you wanted a very robust animation library, if the event that caused this to happen had a pause method, you would want to pause that, and then resume whatever was the default behavior. You're eventually kind of stopping the default behavior and then resuming it. This will make more sense when we talk about as items are added or being removed, why you would want to do this. So as it show how to create a robust helper, then it would show how to get those helpers into your template. If people are using Stash and things like that, well, you would import, and your fade in module, and you could export that to scope helpers, and then you would have access to fade in. If you weren't using Steel, you could just import fade in and then make it part of your helpers on your components. So it was local. And then if you wanted to make it global, well, you could just call Stash add helper to make it global with the same code from up above. I already talked about how you could call those. And then now the real issue is that most of the time you're not going to be listening to an on-click, a user event. The only DOM events that people are probably likely to listen to and want animations to run are when an element is inserted into the page and when an element is removed from the page. What I'm proposing is we follow the DOM's new kind of connected and disconnected callback kind of terminology, so that when an element becomes connected to the document, you can listen to that with onConnected, and when it becomes disconnected, you can listen to that and call fade out. So for example, if you wanted a list of, if you had a list of items that you were looping through and writing each item, and you wanted the LIs to fade in as they were kind of inserted in the page, and if they were removed, fade out, you could do that like this. Now, connected and disconnected aren't going to be built-in events, but you could mix them in to an event registry or the global event registry as shown up here. Eventually, I'd probably want it so that you can mix it into a specific template, but that's not part of this proposal at this point. You would just say, hey, I wanted globally connected and disconnected. So that's one place where it's common, where I think people are going to want to do animations. And the final place is it's typically when events happen on observables, like the view model or an item, like an item is created or something. Here, if I wanted this div to fade out when the to-do was updated, or I guess it would probably be destroyed would be more accurate, I could do that like this. This already works in Stash binding, so there's really nothing to do here. And the final thing I talked about is continuation passing. Like if it wants this to do ran its animation, then maybe I want to call back up on the to-do for something, or run another animation, or do something else. We would encourage people to do this continuation style. Continuation style that's shown here. So vote for this if you want to make it easier to do animations in Stash. Kevin?
Cool. All right. So my last one is one that we have proposed before, and this has gotten some interest, but not not quite enough for us to pick it up. The reason that we want to keep proposing this or propose this again, the reason I do personally is that talking to people and presenting at DoneJS meetups and listening to people talk in the larger JavaScript community, I still think JSX has huge advantages over Stash. The biggest things, we've talked about this all before, biggest things are really, you can use JavaScript and you can debug your templates using DevTools. There isn't a new DSL that you have to learn in order to write your templates. So I'm not going to go through this all again. If you want to go back to the previous video where we went through this full proposal, definitely do that. But if you are someone who likes JSX, obviously vote for this. If you're someone who's had to teach new members of your team Stash as they, when they've joined your team, definitely, I think you should also vote for this. I think JSX is really, would have a huge advantage in teaching and in, making CanJS popular with the broader JavaScript community. So that's it. I will keep it short.
Thank you, Kevin. And I will keep my next one short as well. This is for an alternate form of view models where the current define map and also the upcoming can observe are mostly, they're naturally imperative based because they're based around being object oriented, while they will both have the ability to do more declarative derived property behaviors. It doesn't enforce it. And a lot of people can get away with what I would consider writing code that is harder to understand and just not as maintainable. So this proposal, if you vote for this one, seeks to create a new form of view model based around streams so that every single stateful property value is essentially derived from, as much as possible, from other streams. And it enforces that, unlike current define map and the upcoming can observe. So vote for this if you like streams and you want to see us make a streaming view model. All right, Matthew, I think you're back up.
All right. So there's 3 DoneJS issues or DoneJS proposals to go over. 2 of them we've already done in the past, so I'm going to be like these gentlemen were, be brief about them. The first is improving the live reload performance. It's been a while since I tested it, but a while back I had some experienced some slower live reload when editing Done components specifically. So what I really want to do in this issue is just do kind of an audit over DoneJS and how quickly live reload occurs. There's certain integrations with live reload that happen. Done components one, CSS is another. So I just want to go through all of those, do like kind of an audit, like I said, and see where they're slow, and obviously fix the issues that I find, and possibly do some performance testing as well, perhaps to kind of get that locked in so that we don't have regressions. So if you've been experiencing any performance problems with live reload, vote on this issue, number 1, and number 2, comment on the issue about where you've experienced these problems. Yeah, so that's that. Next is an SSR tips and tricks guide. Server-side rendering is one of the best features that we have in Steel, but there's some tricky bits to it. You can actually set the status code on during SSR. I don't know if you knew that, but it's possible to like set a 404. We want to come up with a better, nicer way to do this, but it's possible now. Now you just have to set your application view model status code property, and it will do that. So this is there's kind of a thing that's kind of hidden a little bit in Done SSR. I'm not sure if it's even documented. I hope it's documented. But yeah, another thing is like using zones. Sometimes there's parts of your code that you do not want to wait on the asynchronous stuff during SSR, and you can actually tell can zone not to wait on this function. Sometimes there's parts of your code that you don't want to be run in SSR at all. Maybe it depends on browser APIs that we don't support or something like that. So this is just doing a guide that kind of goes over it just be kind of sections on different tips and tricks to using DoneSSR or using SSR in DoneJS. So that is that one. And last, this is a new one for this survey. Kind of strangely, it's kind of related to the other two. I didn't realize that until just now. But it's improving our error messaging and how we handle error messages. Currently, what you get is, if an error occurs in your application, depending on where that error is, you might get a little console log in your terminal. You might just get a terrible stack trace dumped on there, or you might get nothing at all. And there's some situations where it's possible for like server rendering to, as you have your done serve running for a very long time, it actually might kind of silently crash, and then your kind of SSR stops working. I would hope to fix those bugs where we find them. But worst case scenario is we should have some fallbacks to, I don't know, perhaps, if the server stops responding, maybe we just send the development.html file and just let you develop completely in your browser. At least it gives you something, or ideally give you better error messages as well. I kind of looked at some of the other tools in our space and how they handle error messages. Here's one tool that kind of it points out, this is some JSX. It points out where the JSX has a syntax error. This is the Elm programming language, and kind of when you make a mistake there, the compiler will give you like I said again, a very nice way to see that. We could go many different directions in this issue. The first step is just kind of identifying like where people have problems. Maybe even do like some user testing, I don't know, and see where people run into issues where they just kind of get stuck and they don't know what's happening, and make sure we come up with good solutions for that. We can go even a step further and kind of have an API so that when an error message is logged, we actually have a way to display where that happens in the code, kind of like what these do. And so you can have, hopefully very nice error messages like, oh, in this case, I forgot to provide the second argument. Right now, I'm not sure what define map does in this case. It might throw, or it might just, it might do something. But if it threw a specific error message, a specific type of error message that had like more metadata to it, or perhaps we could catch that and come up with better error messages. So yeah, kind of first task is just spending a few days just trying to break DoneJS in as many ways as we possibly can, kind of documenting what we find, and then going through other tools and seeing how they handle these types of things, and eventually we'll want to build a system of our own. So yeah, this would be probably something that would take a little bit of time. We probably want to come back to community and be like, hey, this is what we found. What do you think of this? That kind of thing. So if having better error messages in DoneJS, and that includes Still.js as well, is something that you really value, then definitely vote on this one.
Awesome. Thanks, Matthew. I think that wraps it up. I think the only other thing to mention for this time is that we are going to group all of our issues in one big, where I think we only get like 3 or 4 choices. Where previously we grouped them by different project. Now we're going to have them just all together, and this will help us kind of know relative what people really value, because it's kind of hard for us. We're limited in people, so it's hard for us to know whether we should be focusing on DoneJS or Still.js or CanJS. Putting them all together will help this time. I think will help us kind of know what we should prioritize. So thanks again from everybody on the core team. Chasen was busy, so he couldn't make it. He sends his love, and hope to see you all in another 6 weeks voting on issues. See y'all.